can look at you when I talk, right? I don't have to look to the button.
Yep.
My name is Melinda Wade, and I am an actress. I was in New York for about 20 years doing theater, commercials, voiceovers, video games, movies, TV, a lot of independent films, just all sorts of things. And sort of in my voiceover journey, I just happened to get a few audiobooks. And when I moved out to Los Angeles, everything's changed. The industry's changed a lot. And I was like, okay, I need to continue to make a living doing this. And I always enjoyed audiobooks. And I was like, isn't there this thing called ACX? So I knew about it. I didn't know how to do any of it. So I think I just signed up, and I was like, well, let me just audition. And then of course, I got the first 2 books I auditioned for, and they both had a pretty good per finished hour rate. So I then very quickly had to learn actually how to do the other end of the whole process. I understood the performance end of the process. I knew nothing about the other end. So I have to say there was a very steep learning curve, and I had some very, very patient and wonderful rights holders who I worked with. And there just came a point, I was just trying to think about this today. I think there came a point about 9 months ago where I was like, I need to get out of the closet. I need to get out of the closet. That sounds really great, doesn't it? I need to get out of the closet, and I need to get into a booth. So I remember walking into our bedroom, and I looked at my husband, and I was like, honey, I need a booth. We have to figure this out. So he got me a booth, and we've since moved from our last place, and now our booth is very discreetly hidden in our bedroom. It's amazing. My sister, the interior designer, came in and made it look, I just hit the mic, made it look very fancy, so it does not look like a booth. So primarily right now, I'm doing audiobooks and loving it. And I love being able to use my skills as an actor in the world of narration. I think that, could we talk about David for a second? Is that cool for me to just go in? One of the things I have to say that I loved about working with David Gaughran, and I know that's the correct way to say it because I actually emailed him. The guy was in Portugal with no Wi-Fi, and I literally said to him, you need to get to a cafe or a bus stop or something and get me a voice memo of how to say your name, because he's Irish, and I didn't want to screw that up because it's throughout the book, and that would be really ugly. I loved that David was really clear about what he wanted from me. A lot of times people will say, and it's no one's fault, people will say, I want something inspirational, upbeat, friendly. I want something, business-like. David said words like, I want it one-on-one. I want you to sound like you're at a bar talking to a friend and you've already had 1 beer. And I was like, got it. I got it. Because friendly, you can end up sounding like this, but when you're sounding one-on-one like you've already had a beer, there's kind of just a relaxation, there's kind of a roll to it that just kind of naturally happens. And then I was like, okay, that's what we're gonna work with. We're gonna work with something. And so that David was really great that way. He was probably the clearest out of any author or rights holder that I've ever worked with. And because it's just that they don't know. They don't know. They use the words that Findaway or ACX or that any of the multitude of websites, all, like I said, inspirational, upbeat. They use those words. And what we need is something more personal. Because when it gets more personal, we can just jump in. And David also really was great about staying out of my way and allowing me to be in charge of this. Sometimes people will be like, well, can you take that sentence up? Or actually, I'd like that sentence down, and then 2 seconds between that. And what he understood was, if you want that flow and you want it to sound one-on-one and you want it to sound like it's in a bar, then you should really, then he allowed me to be the leader in that. And so for that, I was incredibly grateful. I really love working with Findaway. There's a couple of reasons. The first one is there's always somebody on the other end. And that's really great. There's no, I'm not here to attack anybody else. I'm just going to talk about the positives of Findaway. So I have any questions, I just write them. And by the end of the day, usually an hour or two later, someone's written me back and said, oh, okay, I had a question about a book recently. What do you say over chapter 100? Because technically it's chapter 101, but some people might say 101, 101. There's different ways to go. And I wrote them and I was like, is there a standard? Should I be knowing about this? And yes, there's a correct way, but there is no standard in the business. And so I love that like things like that they get right back to you. So there's that. I also like the way they set up when somebody has corrections for a chapter, the formatting, it's really easy. It's really super easy, because then I can just have a discussion about one chapter, and because a lot of times, like, look, if there's 30 chapters in a book, I want to know that we're specifically talking about chapter 22. Well, they usually are very good about like writing a full, like, this is what the rights holder wants. They're usually very, very good about that. I guess next time what I could do, if I really did have questions, I could just write back to the person at Findaway and just say, hey, I've got questions about, they are saying upbeat and friendly with a business sense to them. Are they wanting one-on-one? Do they want it to sound like I'm talking to a small group of people? Do they want it to sound like I'm Brene Brown and I'm talking to a large group of people? Like, what is specifically, because the more specific you get, the better chance you have of getting the job. It's gotten more technical. I will say that my sweet husband was the one who set up all the mics and everything like that. For me, I have an editor that I work with. Now, I do that. I read it, and then I go in. I like to read it on my iPad the night before, the chapters that I know I'm going to do. I want to go through it. I want to make sure that there's no words that I'm like, what is that? And if there are, what I do is I put them on my phone on my voice memo. And I bring my phone into the booth, and so that I can just very quickly. Now, some people use iAnnotate for that. For me, it's just really easy to be just like, oh, I don't know what that word is. How do you pronounce that? Blah, 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 and I put it down, just like that. So I have in the booth, I have a laptop for recording, my iPad, which I think is the best thing. I have the iPad Pro, and truthfully, that thing is the best thing in the world for reading off of, because it's so gentle on your eyes. So that's the real reason we got it. And then I keep my phone in there so that I can listen to the voice memo stuff. And I immediately, after every chapter, I proof. I don't wait. And I know some people send it off to the proofer. I actually do that myself, and there's a reason for it. I am really specific about timing that I like. I think that there's a very natural ebb and flow to the voice, and sometimes I find that they will do too much spacing. So there will be these bizarre kind of pauses, even in very, high-end books. I've heard it, and I like a very natural, organic sound. I want it to sound like when you finish one paragraph, that there's a thought, a breath, and then we go to the next paragraph, rather than I finish it and then go. And I hate that. I hate that lack of flow. Or when they say, blah, da, 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 he said, da, 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 she said angrily. I'm like, let's take out that pause. So that's why I proof and I make sure all the flow is good. And then when the book is done, I send it off to my editor and I create an epic spreadsheet so that when it comes back with whatever their corrections are, I have everything written out. When I get back from the editor, I check off that I did it, I did the correction, he did the correction, and then I send that off. David got it, and I send that off as an email to every single person I work with, because in all honesty, it's faster. Let's say we were working together and you had an 8-hour book, and let's say there were 14 mistakes that needed to be done, either technical or things that I mispronounced or I misread. If you have that spreadsheet in front of you, you can get to exactly where it is and what it is that you need to listen to quickly. Make sure I did it correctly. Like what I said before, be specific about what you want. And that doesn't mean be friendly, be upbeat, be mysterious. If you have this fantasy, if you have a fantasy, and let's say you're doing a sci-fi series and you have a fantasy that you want your lead to really just sound like one of those chicks who's just like always on Instagram and who's like always walking around taking a selfie of herself, that's how you need to say it to me. Say it, she's the kind of person who's always taking a selfie. That's a clear image. That's really clear. So the more clear you can get, the better. The other thing is, and I hear authors talk about this on some of like the Facebook pages, they'll talk about having hired somebody and then they're like, I hired the wrong narrator. I got halfway through the book and it's not working, the person's voice. And I'm like, yeah, because you said you wanted somebody edgy. So you hired somebody who sounds like this. And he's like, kind of like, always kind of has this kind of rough kind of thing to her voice. And I'm like, okay, that's somebody who dies in chapter 3 because they were like ripped limb by limb by a cyborg. That is not somebody who you want to listen to for 8 hours. And I really would, when the authors are looking for a narrator, don't think about the 5-minute clip. Think about, is this going to work for 6 hours with somebody sitting in a car? Is that voice, can they go into really interesting characters and like really kind of like, create some depth to their voice and, and also talk up here if necessary and be like a little kid who's maybe like panicked or something? But is their regular voice something that's appealing that you want to listen to? Because I really think that oftentimes the authors lose sight of that, and they end up with somebody who might have the quirky edge that they're looking for, but no one wants to listen to that for 6 hours. If the person isn't funny, like if your book is funny and they're not funny in the audition, they're not gonna be funny. I always tell my playwright friends, funny walks into the room. You always know, funny walks into the room funny. You know when someone's funny. If you have a romantic comedy and you need someone to be funny, make sure that they have a charming quirk to their voice and a way of saying your lines that's actually funny. So that's another piece of advice I would give. When I did, it was funny, I did Pamela Anderson. And then when I did I did the whole Grand Theft, like many of the Grand Theft Auto series. I did Paris Hilton. I did Ann Coulter. We changed the names. And I did one of those, they sound like they're from like Entertainment Tonight. Like, what are they called? Lisa Gibbons. Like one of those people who talks like this and they're all about entertainment. And you're like, oh God. and I did Lindsay Lohan. I will say, Paris Hilton, between you and I, suffered the worst death in Grand Theft Auto. It was not pretty. I think is great. I think it's so important to help them, because I feel like they throw money out there and they're about 60% knowledgeable. And that is kind of scary, because they leave it up to us to be, like to do the 100%. And I'm like, I need you to match me. I need you to tell me exactly what you want and how you want to do this. Because I mean, it's really hard when they come back and they're like, but that's not what I wanted. And you're like, well, you approved the first 15, like you know what I mean? So that's why we all have to get on the same page. And and at the end of the day, one of the things I think I love the most about doing audiobooks, especially with the self-published community, is the actor in me loves bringing the written word alive. And so I love being able to take this from somebody and saying, let me take this next step. Let me join you on this, but let me bring this to life. And that to me is really fun.